Hi, folks. In our next architecture webinar, we have a really special guest, David Boyne. And we were talking about doing this webinar for a long time because when I'm working with my customers and my projects, then a common and recurring question is how to document event-driven systems or in general distributed systems. And surprisingly, even though we are fighting with that on a daily basis, then for many years there was no real answer. And Dave is currently working on the event catalog, which is a tool that I believe can help us to make it a bit smoother experience. And that's what will be talking about it today. So how to deal with event-driven systems and how to document it and how to make it a bit more manageable. And this will be quite hands-on. Dave will show us his tool, so you can see and decide whether it can help in your systems, and I'm sure it can. So, hi, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, hi Oscar. No, it's great to be here. As you're just saying, yeah, it's quite an interesting thing actually. There was nothing really around, and I kind of always think of the story of things I share with a lot of people like APIs, right? And APIs, we've been building APIs for like 20, 30 years, whatever, a long time. And there's a lot of governance around APIs and a lot of like open API documentation tools and like Postman or whatever. There's just a lot of tooling around this whole thing. But event-driven architectures is or distributed systems, I guess. So mainly event-driven architectures in this case. It's hard, it's hard to document these moving parts and what the hell's going on. And I think people are interestingly kind of finding that problem space, and it's what the hell do we do? We've got these moving parts. We're using events and messages. Where are they? What do they mean? What do the schemas mean? Okay, we're using a schema registry, but it's not enough. And it's like, okay, and there's just nothing, it's just not a lot out there. So yeah, event catalog is well, it is my passion. I don't know if it's the answer. But yeah, I'm curious, if you're watching this, I'm curious, what you think and any feedback that you may have. And the whole thing's open source. So even if there's issues or features,
Mm,
I'm sure you can raise some issues and get involved if that's the kind of thing.
yeah. So before we go with the hands-on, I'd like to ask your opinion. Why is it like that people and we are not treating our events and messages as the API? Because for some reason, for the web API, maybe because it's longer, we
Mm.
are somehow in our project more used to having those discussions like front end and back end team discussing whether the specific contract, so request, which is actually web request is also a message,
Mhm.
is fine for both sides. But somehow for messages and events we are not thinking in that terms. It's
Mm.
like, yeah, it's published and someone
Yeah.
subscribe, and what's the big deal?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like years ago, I used to work for a enterprise in the UK. So I was there for like eight years. So this was probably about, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably more than that. Um, but I remember APIs at the time, right? We were doing microservices just come out. ThoughtWorks was just coining the whole thing, and everyone's going microservices. MongoDB is what we decided to use. And we were building APIs. And I remember at the time, APIs was just this free for all concept of like, okay, we can just build an API and we can just, yeah, have some roots and whatever and this and that. And then kind of the whole industry, I guess, at that point in time, we're like, this is actually quite hard. So, 2011, I think it was, Swagger spec come out and it's like, look, we
Hmm.
need some standards and governance and everyone now, fast forward 10, was it 14 years, and everyone's using OpenAPI, which was Swagger. Most people, right? And I think it's just natural conversations, like as you mentioned, like we have contract between our consumers of the API, and we're the producers of the API. But I think the history is just repeating itself. We have
Mm-hmm.
messages and events and commands and queries if you're going down that pattern. But as you mentioned earlier, that HTTP is just a message. Um, but I think what's happening, what I'm seeing anyway, is like the barrier to entry is lowering for all this event-driven architecture stuff. So we have
Mm-hmm.
like AWS, Azure, and Google providing like services off the shelf, but we also have like startups. We even have like Cloudflare doing some cool stuff. We have startups like Ingest, as an example, Temporal doing like workflow stuff, and everyone's like talking around events and messages. And it's easier now today than it is ever to publish a message onto a managed Kafka
Mm-hmm.
thing, right?
Yep.
Um, which is great for us developers because we're like, awesome, we don't have to get into the details of all this, but we're back to square one. It's like, okay, well, what goes inside the message? What does a good message look like? What are these integration types, private, public? And when you start diving into all of this, and I think that's just history repeating itself. I think
Mm-hmm.
the people I'm speaking to with EventCatalog and clients I work with, it's people are facing the same problem over and over again. And the
Mm-hmm.
problems are like, who's consuming this? What does this mean? How do I make changes? What's my schema evolution strategy? Where are the standards and things like that? Now we have standards like async API, cloud events. These kind of things are emerging, but standards take time,
Mm-hmm.
specifications take time, contracts take time, and more importantly, human behavior takes a long time to change, right?
Yeah.
So, hopefully with these tools and some education pieces, and you've got to feel the pain before you
Yeah.
can solve it. And I think we're seeing a tick in that. People
Mm-hmm.
are like, okay, um, I want to do this stuff. I want to use these tools, but I need to just stop for a minute and
Mm-hmm.
think about contracts. And I think that's where we are at the moment in that journey on that life cycle, really.
Mm. Yeah, I think I like what you said about that it's just a part of the journey and step that we are in and about the pain.
Mhm.
So what I see not only about events, about any technology, for me, it's like when people start to complain about it, then that means that this technology or approach is getting mature because
Mhm.
at least people build something, they have it on production, they burn their fingers maybe, and
Mhm.
then they start to realize that they need to do it in a more organized way and
Mhm.
apply also some governance practices. Do you think that's right? That's the like this the step in adoption of event-driven technologies that people build those tools and now they just want to have more to be able to operate and evolve them.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think the interesting problems that you see is like when you start out like using something off the shelf or Kafka, Confluent, whatever, or any message bus. It's like things are relatively simple. Like if we were to get together today and build something, we kind of get a grasp and a concept on the messages passing through and the different patterns that we're using. Now times that, along that journey, now times that to teams and enterprises passing messages in this architecture onto the same broker or multiple brokers or different channels and different topics. And it becomes like we don't know what's happening. We don't know who's
Yeah.
doing what, who's sending what. We don't know like if you're tasked to create a new feature, there could be an event already raised in your architecture, but how do you know that? The only option you have is two options. Number one, go talk to the team. Number two, look through the code. Um, if you're lucky, someone's documented something somewhere. But just feel like we can do better than that. I feel like there's a huge amount of value there, especially like enterprise scale, large
Yeah.
scale systems of like, okay, if we can reduce the time it takes for a developer to ask the question, where is the event? Who owns it? Who am I about to break? What is the semantic meaning behind the event? Now we're into like domain driven design and domain events and all this kind of stuff. Um, we can save I think we can save a load of time and add value to businesses. Because I can't comprehend, you know, what is the solution today? And the solution is just the solution is the problem where everyone tells me it's we don't know what is happening. Um, and it's an interesting what you said. It's like, is that a technical problem? No, not at all. You know, it's not a problem to the broker or anything like that. I mean, yeah, there are technical issues, you know, with idempotency to handle and all these kind
Mm-hmm.
of things and distribute systems and transactions or whatever. Um, but it becomes a governance problem and that kind of mindset problem and team problem and tackling the problem in a different mindset, and that's hard to change. But as I said earlier, you know, you've got to go through the pain to see and look for solutions, I guess.
Yeah,
But
like
yeah,
PTSD driven design.
yeah, exactly. You gotta kind of go through that. Yeah.
Okay, so David, could you show us how Event Catalog can help in at least reducing this PTSD?
Yeah, yeah. I like that. That should be the headline on the website. Um, cool. Yeah, I can share some stuff. So I'll walk through it. If you got kind of questions, feel free to just
Mm-hmm.
jump in. So yeah, Event Catalog. It's an open source, just quick high level. It's an open source tool, and it's actually at the moment a static websites documentation tool. So you've seen them all out there. There are loads out there, especially for like open API things. Um, One thing I'm actually looking at the moment is actually doing runtime stuff, but we can pick that up later. But the whole idea is, okay, how do you get started? Now, there is a command that we can call, which is just this. Let me just see if I can zoom in some people. But we can just create like npx, create catalog, my catalog. And what this will do is create us a new catalog in the directory. So it asks you what your org name is. We can just say event catalog limited for now. And then here's the bit you normally speed up in the videos. But what it does now, we install the dependency. So what you're going to get out of the box is event catalog core, which you don't need to do anything with. And the whole idea with event catalog, while this is doing that, I can kind of just share. The whole idea really is we have domains, services, event, and the messages. And if you think of like, you know, from especially from it's very influenced from domain-driven design, but everything is optional. But the whole idea really is, you know, I have a service, I'm on a team, we own the service. This service accepts messages, and the service maybe send messages. These messages can be commands or queries or events. You know, when I say a message, our service can accept over HTTP a post request
Mm-hmm.
or a GET request. Our service can use Kafka under the hood or EventBridge or whatever, you know, Event Grid. Say, okay, now I publish a message, an event, which is a type of message. So it allows us to kind of map these things out, you know, document these things. So when users come along and say, okay, what is happening? Um, we have a snapshot of what is happening. Now the question is, does it represent the real system? That's always the trick with these things, and we'll come into that a bit later. Um, but it can help solve the problems that we spoke about. So what have we got? So we got an install here. So everything's just installed. We'll clear that. And if I go to CD my catalog, so we're in the catalog now. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just open the project and walk through what we have. Um, so out of the box, we have all this stuff. At the root of the project is your event catalog config file. So this is where you can enable certain features or disable stuff or whatever. You know, that's all on the documentation website. But out of the box, we have a title, tagline, org name, edit URLs where we can edit them, and then that's kind of it, really. You know, we have a logo, we can change stuff, customize stuff for our catalog. Um, Now here on the left, so if let's just run this first, and I can visually show you what happens. So we run npm run dev. So what this do is starts the catalog locally. Let me just actually kill other catalogs I have running on my machine. So on port 3000, okay. So let me just bring this up. Sorry, probably before we get into loads of different tabs. So this is Event Catalog. This is what you get out the box. So it's a static website you can host anywhere. It doesn't really matter where you host it. You can just build it, get the artifacts, and chuck it into S3 or Cloudflare pages, GitHub pages, internally, lock it down, auth, whatever you want. And the whole idea here is it's got a bunch of features here on the left, and we have this kind of homepage here. We can search things. Features on the left include documentation, includes visualization. So I'm a very visual person, and I think event-driven architecture kind of lend itself to be a visual thing, right? Especially as we
Mm.
draw things on
Mm.
whiteboards and we have producers, consumers, this kind of stuff. We have an
And sorry for interrupting,
yeah, go for
but
it.
because I also was following your EDA visuals, so just
Ah,
a
yeah.
question: what was first? Like, what imp did those visuals that you were doing about various integrations and usage
Yeah.
of events had a direct impact on event catalog?
Yeah, for sure. I was so if other people don't know, if you go to EDA visuals here, this is like a free book you can download and resources about event-driven architectures. So a few years ago, I started to just dive deep into event-driven architectures, like reading various books like enterprise integration patterns, domain-driven design books, everything, right? Just consume. And as you start consuming these things, ideas start to arise. And then I literally wrote my notes down and just shared them with people. And that's what visuals are. They're just my personal notes. But yeah, visuals help me for sure, especially with domain-driven design um, and event-driven architectures. There's huge overlap right here. See if we can actually find something. Yeah. So like here is the visual here. And I think there is huge benefits, especially with like domain discovery using event
Mm-hmm.
storming or event modeling, and we're already talking in events. And I think the concepts of these boundaries, these bounded contexts and domains, if we can represent them in our services and our systems with our EDA, and you'll see in a second, Event
Mm-hmm.
Catalog actually has a lot of influence from domain-driven design. Um, Optional influence, but yeah, I think because it makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
And you'll see that. But yeah, what come first is this come first, and then sorry, I kind of went on one. And then Event Catalog was actually built 3 years ago as a side project, and it was like built, left on the shelf, and then I went to do stuff at AWS for a couple of years, and then over the couple of years, I was kind of speaking to lots of enterprise customers, and everyone's just in a mess. It's like we don't know what the hell's going on. So I decided to leave and do open source full time. So it's kind of swinging back around now. So
Mm.
yeah, the visuals have an impact on this for sure.
Mm.
The learnings, I guess, from all this
Yeah.
stuff. Um,
Yes.
so
Sorry for
yeah,
derailing your
no,
introduction.
it's fine. It's fine. No, no, keep going. Just
Uh,
interrupt, otherwise I will keep going for a.
I always like to know the origin story behind the tool because that helps
Mhm.
me to understand where it comes from and what was the
Mhm.
initial struggle. But yeah, go on. Sorry again.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. I think also an initial part of the story there too is I used to work at Async API. So this is a specification for event-driven architectures. So great people, great community there. And this was kind of like I was thinking about async APIs, specifications, think of your open API spec. And I always thinking in the back of my head, like, why can't specs be more than just YAML files? And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what drives Event Catalog too, what initially did anyway.
Mm-hmm. Thank
But
you.
the whole idea really is like documentation tool is very designed for EDA. So what I mean, everything you see here is driven down by markdown files. So there's this whole like movement at the moment, and Event Catalog follows this, which is like you have your docs as code. Okay. So that allows us to like follow best practices, like have pull requests on docs or or version docs or this kind of stuff. And I think that's an interesting paradigm shift when we're talking about docs and keeping things up to date. But that you still that is the core problem with any doc system is keeping things up to date. And I think that comes down to a lot of things. I think one of the core things there is really is changing mindsets of like governance mindset, of where does your schemas, I don't know, where do your schemas belong? Why should we keep the docs up to date? How is that going to help the organization? So if anyone's watching and got ideas around any of that, yeah, I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, in my past projects, I was always doing markdowns because, as you said,
Mhm.
it's at least give you the chance to make it as a regular part of your review and your developer journey. It's not perfect, but at least that's something that always worked best for me and what I advise people just do markdowns. So I think that your approach at least aligns with my
Mm.
experience around it.
Yeah, for sure. I have had feedback of people, different approaches or editors and stuff, but I think Markdown's okay for now, for
Mm,
sure. So here we have like domains. So if you think there's a hierarchy, so we have domains, and then we have services, then we have messages. So messages belong to services, and services belong to domains at the moment. So domain, what does a domain look like? So we can click on here, and remember everything you see here is driven down Markdown files. So I can show you an example of that in a second. So here is a domain of orders. We have some stuff. We have this thing here, which is a component. We'll have a look at this. We have a visual representation of the domain using this is in theory the bounded context. That's what I documented it as. We have ability to add like mermaid diagrams if you want to do that, and different flows. So I'll get into all of this. There's quite a lot going on actually. So let's have a look at the code. Let's get to the code actually, and just start with the domain. If I can find the project. Cool, here it is. So here we got the domains folder. So event catalog is you can actually group things by folders. I recommend doing this. You don't have to do this. You can have like domains and services and whatever else all in the root directory. But yeah, grouping things is nice. So we have the orders, what we just saw, and we have this index.md file. This is the root of this page. Okay. So we have the orders, and then we can see, okay, we have a bunch of front matter, and then we have a bunch of content. The front matter is like, think of this as the API to this particular resource type. So all we're saying here, I was just zooming a minute. All we're saying here is like, well, it's the ID is orders. Everything has to have an ID. Everything at the moment in Event Catalog also has to have a version. Like you version your docs, you version your schemas. Um, there is a question about versioning domains at the moment, so this might come out. So I'm not sure it makes total sense, but at the moment it's there. You can assign owners to things. Every resource in Event Catalog, services, messages, and domains can have owners to them. Why is this interesting? Because, who owns this service? Okay, this team and this user. Who owns this event? Okay, this user or team. Who owns this domain? And once you have the ownership, you can actually start asking them questions, talk to them on Slack, and we'll get into all of that. Here you map what services belong into this domain. Now, the version here is optional. So if we take the version out, this basically what this is saying is this service has, sorry, this domain has these services and it's always the latest version of these services. If we want, we can lock down to the version of the service. Now, as I said, it doesn't really make sense for a domain too much, the version stuff, but we'll get to that. We can add badges and this kind of stuff. Event Catalog supports MDX. For people that don't know what MDX is, it's like a component library, components inside of Markdown. This allows us to do like some cool things like use components off the shelf. Event Catalog has a component library you can use. So this is the um, I don't actually know how to pronounce that. How would you pronounce that? Ad, ad,
A-
ad,
admonition? I don't know.
admonition. Yeah, I'm not even sure what that means. But I know it's kind of standard for these duck tools. But what I can do here is just say hello world. We can put this as a warning. If I come back, it has like hot module reloading. So as we make changes, it represents this locally. So we can do whatever we want. We can go back and delete this and save that, and the whole thing will go. Should go. So that's cool. So if I go back to the docs, we have whatever. So the whole idea here really is to have teams document their resources. So like the reason why I think this is important is because schemas can only go so far, right? If I was to show you a schema of an order placed event and we're looking at a JSON schema, that's great for engineers and developers, I guess, to an extent. But the question is, what's the semantic meaning behind all of this? And I think when I said
Hmm.
earlier about domain-driven design, as we do things like event storming, we discuss the meaning of the events. We discuss like what is this thing, and we talk about naming conventions, and we have conflict in these sessions, and there is meaning behind these events. So why not document them and share that meaning with others so others can discover the event and say, okay, the order placed means this in this context means this particular thing. Oh, great, fantastic. I can consume that. I know exactly what it is. Versus, I guess, just guessing. Other things Event Catalog has is things like tiles. Like these are just components, right? So as we can add more tiles here. If we add two here, come back and we should see, we
Hmm.
got these tiles and these nice looking things here. So they're just a visual thing. We had the node graph. The node graph is actually under the hood doing a lot of things. So the node graph in this case is saying, okay, I know this is your boundary. I know this is your domain. I know you have services in this domain, and I know these services have messages underneath them. So the event catalog's doing all of this for you. That's why you see all of this here. Um, that this domain, we can't really see it. Let's open it in the visualizer quickly. This domain, the orders domain, has these particular services. Um, so I can click on them. So we can actually see, okay, we have three services in this domain. This service here, this notification service, is actually, if I click on it, we can actually see it's accepting these particular queries and also accepting these particular events.
Hmm.
So right now, visually, we can actually see, okay, well, this is how the service works. It's got probably HTTP protocol here, I imagine, and it's got something here, and it's kind of publishing events out over here. It is in this example, we can see this service is makes a request, a query for some reason to list inventory message, and this so happens to be accepted by this service, right? So we can start to see some flow. We can start to see some stuff. We can export this out and download this. We can actually like turn off simulation. We can actually like look at channels. So Event Catalog supports channels as a documentation type. So in this case, I'll give you an example. We have this service, the order service, and it is publishing, invokes a command to add inventory, but it's over a particular channel. This happens to be Kafka for whatever reason,
Hmm.
or whatever we just documented. So I added this feature because channels can get quite noisy sometimes,
Yep.
but some people might like to see that and see, okay, how is this thing getting delivered? And we can actually document the broker itself. And just say, okay, this broker is a Kafka, it's a MQTT, it's NATS, it's anything. Event Catalog is technology agnostic. It doesn't care what you're using. Or its aim is to provide discoverability and documentation for everyone.
Hmm.
So that's that on there. So visualizer, you can access the visualizer here. So as we just saw, we can see this. We can actually go into all different services. We can go into the events themselves. We can go into queries. Everything, right? Everything is here. But what we had previously in the orders domain is we just have like a stripped down version of it. So we add it into our
Hmm.
documentation. So you can see here just a small version. If we go back to the code, that's not the code. If we go back to the code, we can also see like mermaid tags. Yeah. So if you have mermaid tags, you can just add any mermaid that you want in Event Catalog. Um, we also have the idea of flows, but I'll come back to that later. But what flows are the ability to like document choreography or orchestration in Event Catalog. And what I mean by that is if you have a user, let's say we have a user that signs up and a user that purchases a product. So to the business, this is maybe a flow, of the order purchasing something from us. I don't know, but along that flow, loads of things are happening, right? So an event is fired, a service is processing some information. We have a checkout, we have a shopping cart. We also have third-party integrations with things, right? So we have this like flow of things, and that's exactly what flows are. So flows allow us in Event Catalog to describe these. Um, so in this case, this is the user cancels their subscription. We can click on the visualizer, which didn't work. So there's a bug there. So that's always good. But we should be able to click on the visualizer. I'll have to fix that one. Um, I'll write that down actually. Um, So what's happening here is we have a user. We call them actors. Same principles as I guess event storming here.
Hmm.
It triggers this particular command. This command triggers this particular service. This service goes to an external service and comes back, and this kind of stuff. So flow is actually an interesting one because I did flows about 3 months ago as a concept, as an idea, kind of from event storming, I guess. Um, but yeah, people are like this, and there's a lot of work to do here. The way you document flows at the moment is a bit. Okay, I can show you. So we have the orders. Let's have a look. I have to remember where everything is now. Um, I'll find it in a second.
Hmm.
Um, but I think they're and what I'm hearing from a lot of companies at the moment is they're actually finding quite a amount of value in flows. More value than I originally thought. So there's some interesting stuff and work
Yeah.
to be done here. Um, and one thing I'm also looking at doing at some point is a studio, which is like a drag and drop interface on Event Catalog. But if we have time, I can talk about that later because there's a lot to get through. But yeah, this is it. Yeah, this is Flow. So all we're doing here, let's take a step back. All we're doing here is we're documenting a domain, we're adding services to this domain, and we're adding information to this domain. Now, interestingly, what we can also to do to domains is we can add ubiquitous language. This is a new feature that was actually launched last month, I think. But the whole point here is just from domain-driven design again, too. It's like, well, in this particular context, yeah, what is a payment? What is a purchase order? What
Hmm.
is an order line? What is an SKU? I have no idea, right? But there are things and terms that you'll find in your events and your messages and your APIs that belong to this particular context. So if you use the ubiquitous language dictionary, this is what you get, and then you can click on these, and then you can actually go to each domain and have a look at the ubiquitous language and dive deeper and understand what some of these terms mean.
Hmm.
So there's that nice feature here. That's probably it. From a domain's point of view, I can see down here that the domain has owners. It has teams and users. So let me go to an example here. I have teams and users. So teams and users are markdown files. Um, and so I can say, okay, we have a full stack team. This could be any team. Its members are these particular people. You can contact them on Slack or wherever. There are other properties here. And here is some information. Now you can add whatever. You can add as much or as little as you want. And then the same with users. Here I am. Here's my picture. What I do. Um, yeah, some info about me. But what this allows us to do from a documentation point of view is okay, here are the full stackers own this service. Who are the full stackers? How do I email them? How do I contact them? So it's just another way of saying, okay, um, who owns these particular things in this architecture? And I guess with, this, as we were talking about earlier, like distributed systems and messages and all this kind of stuff, it's can be quite hard to find some of this.
Hmm.
So this feature just helps with some of
Yeah.
that. Um, and equally, when you come to the teams page or the users page, you can actually see exactly what they own. This team own this particular message. This message so happens to be an event. Okay, what does the event mean? And guess what? Everything we just seen, an event is Markdown. So we can
Mm-hmm.
document all sorts of things for this event. So we have the inventory adjusted event. So now if we go back here and go back to domains, let's just not save any of this. So we have, was it in orders? Yeah, okay. So remember what I said earlier was um, each of your, so it's based on folder structures too. So we have domains, and here's the orders domain, excuse me. And then we have the services, right? So the services belong inside the domain. So we can click in here and we have an inventory service, a notification service, an order service. Okay. So we click on the inventory service and now we have different types of messages, commands, events, and queries. But at the root, we also have the index. So this is the index for this particular service. Now, what we can say here is exactly as the same as domains. What we're saying here on the inventory service is this service receives these messages that we've documented in event catalog and also sends these types of messages. So happens when we go to the inventory service, we start to see all this. When we go down to the node graph, we start to see all that too. So we start to see this representation of this stuff happening. Um, As I said, exactly the same down here. You can link repos to a service so people can quickly find them, owners, versions, which we'll get to in a second. And then you can see it receives these types of messages and sends these. We use our iconography here. Hopefully some of it makes sense, but like the lightning bolt represents an event, search thing represents a query, and then the speech bubble represents a command. So we
Mm-hmm.
can quickly, hopefully, see things happening. And then down here, all we've done is we're using stuff like a steps component. Like, how do you call this service? Okay, well, you install this package, whatever, people would do their own documentation, but
Mm-hmm.
you can add anything. You can add, code snippets. Let's just add a quick one here, um, like this. And then we can see this come up down here, right? And we can copy
Mm-hmm.
this and paste this into our thing. So it's really up to the developers and the teams to say, okay, if we want to document how do we use this, we can do that if we really want to, which I suggest probably is useful. But let's keep diving deeper. So the service here has commands and events and queries. We've seen that up here. So if we click on events, we have the inventory adjusted event. Now, the format should look familiar. We have an index.md file. This is the root. Now, what we're saying here is the event. Here's a summary. Here are the owners. This event belongs to a particular channel. So now we have the option to add channels. So each resource type has um, its own like structure and API here, which you can find in the docs. We're adding some custom badges, and then we're also adding a schema, which we'll come to in a second. But down here, everything's exactly the same. We're using different things. So if now we go to the inventory adjusted event, which is this one, we can see exactly that. We can start seeing the schema, right? We can start seeing payload examples and Avro schemas and how to publish and consume the event, which these people have kindly documented for us. So now we have not just, you remember what I said earlier, what is today's options? Today's options are here is a schema, right? And but now we have much more than that. We can contact, view the schema. Um, we can view the architecture diagram, whatever it is else we want. Now, talking about schemas are an important part of event-driven architectures and like anything really, contracts. An event catalog supports any schema type. Doesn't really matter. So we have a JSON schema here as an example. So this is JSON schema for this particular event, just a
Mm-hmm.
dummy thing at the moment. And we can put that inside this events directory alongside this event. So here's the schema, great. In the index.md file, we can actually use a schema viewer component. and say, okay, I want to render this out for my users. It's gonna be whatever 500 in size. Excuse me. And if we go back to the UI, this is exactly what we get here. This is the schema viewer. So there's a custom React component that gets rendered on the screen, but for users of the system, yeah, they can just see stuff, which is pretty nice. And it's the same with Avro schemas. We can actually pull these in, we can document these. Um, and up here, we say the schema path is the app. So what this means really is that when you download the schema, you can see here that it's downloaded. So we can actually download schemas, view schemas, and all this kind of stuff. So the other thing we haven't really spoke about too is versioning. So as I said earlier, everything in Event Catalog can be versioned, even domains for now. But services and messages can be versioned. Now, why would you want to version this stuff? Is because, well, like anything, today we create the inventory adjusted event and we have a schema, and the schema looks beautiful. And next week or a month's time or a year's time, things change and we change this stuff. So Event Catalog allows us to version the documentation, but also version everything that comes with that, the schemas, everything. So
Hmm.
what we can do is actually go back in time and have a look at a previous version of this message. We can see the first version of this message basically has nothing going on really. He's just had this thing lying around in the system and not a lot happening. If we go to 100, we can see, yeah, the documentation has changed for whatever reason. You might still be using 100, so you might want to come here and look at the schema for that. And then we have the latest one, which we've just seen. The other thing we also have is change logs. So the reason for this is like as things change, why why are they changing? Is is information that often gets lost. So we create an event today. In a year's time, we change it. Now the author of the event has now left the company for whatever reason, and we don't really know why this property, this PII property or whatever else, is now on the event. But we can actually start creating change logs for this stuff and actually say, okay, we can actually start documenting why things are changing. We can do like automatic diffs for changes. So if you have like a schema in that folder and a schema in the other one, we'll see some diffs. But the key here really is like we can also add custom information to these things. It's like breaking or badges, breaking change, and this kind of stuff. So it just gives developers another way of documenting change in your systems, um, which is, yeah, as I said, often overlooked, and people don't really know why things are changing,
Yeah.
especially with history, especially like things that span over months or even years. It's like, okay, we can look in the Git history, I guess, at some Git messages, but again, that's only going to tell us certain things. Um, so maybe this is a good way to do that. And the way we do that, all we do is we create a new folder with a version number. We chuck everything inside there, and that's it. If you want custom change logs, you can add a changelog.md file in these folders, and that will render as we just saw in the UI. Um, yeah, so we can start documenting some of these changes. So there's that. That's the change logs. And, as I said, we have commands, we have queries. Everything here is optional. You don't have to have queries. You don't have to document queries or commands if you don't want to. But it's the same principle. We have a query get inventory list. We click on this, we got some information. We click on the schema. Here's the schema for this particular HTTP request. Okay, great. Um, and that's it. And then we just scale this out. We have more services. We have more queries and more events, and then we have more domains coming along and more things happening, and we have flows. Here's an example of a flow, which may change, but the whole idea really is you could document. There are ways to document the next step. We start here. What is the next step? What is the next step? What is the branch here? What is the decisions? And this is kind of like the choreography orchestration kind of documentation tool, really. Of just saying, okay, We are documenting that a user cancels a subscription. This is what happens when a user cancels a subscription. They will initiate that they cancelled. They will proceed to which will proceed to the service. So the way here, the way this really works is just we're referencing an inventory of things already in Event Catalog. So other teams may add these resources that we can reference. No, as I said earlier, this is like no one really wants to manage too much Markdown or YAML. I get that. So there are tools in the process at the moment of like visual editors, which I can kind of show you a quick sneak later. But like imagine you can drag and drop these things, right? Imagine you can have an inventory of your stuff, and now I can drag and drop things, connect things, and create flows in seconds, and actually press a button and sync that
Mm.
back to Event Catalog. So these are things, features that may come. And then equally, there are other things in here, public, any public files, pages, you can have custom landing pages. So what you'll see here, when we go into the documentation, this is a custom page. At the moment, we only have one page you can customize, but other things we're going to be looking at is like adding the ability to add as many pages, as many things as you want. And the reason for that is like, what happens if we want to document tutorials or we want to document
Hmm.
guides or we want to document other things? There's no reason why we can't introduce something down here and like link out to your documentation. So you can like move everything into one place if that's something you want to do. Um, as I said before, we have the visualizer here. The visualizer is visualizing everything we just seen. Everything is powered by Markdown with the references in that front matter. And Event Catalog will do its best to represent this here and simulate messages, which is kind of a nice feature. Something we added recently too is like domain maps. It's not working actually in this example
Mm.
at the moment. But one thing I want to look at more, get this working better, is if Event Catalog understands the domains and understands the services and understands the relationship of messages between the services, there's no reason why you can automate a bounded context map between all this
Yeah,
stuff. So
that
you could
that that would be great because then you can also have a like context maps are great for distinguishing whether this communication should be command or event because you know the relationships and context between those different domains.
exactly that, yeah. So if I think I'd have to double check why that's not working, but what should be happening is, we have this thing going to this particular node, and then we can actually immediately see if we have domains consuming events they shouldn't, or this kind of stuff. So I think there is value here, once you start to abstract this stuff out, and seeing that. Then down here, as I said earlier, you have flows. These flows are the things we've just seen. You can visualize these and have a look. Other things that you might be interested in is like exploring. So if you are tasked to quickly find a message or an event, this is actually like paginated
Mm.
table. We can actually quickly search for like the order confirmed event. We can see the producer, and we can see the consumers of this event. We can actually also filter by certain badges. And the badges is really
Mhm.
up to us. You can add custom badges, custom filters, this kind of stuff. If I click on this, it'll take us directly there. Just another way to quickly filter out things. And you can do the same for commands, queries, services. The service we can immediately see receives these types of messages. It sends this message, and we can just another way to see things. Something last week, actually, which I added, which is this directory. This is the same thing for users and teams. So now think of your organization and your enterprise. Okay, we have 20 teams or 100 teams and 200 users. Who is owning what, right? And it's like, okay, well, I'm looking for David. David, I can see owns 13 events. This actually truncates because it can get quite big. You can see these are the things I own, and these are the things, commands I own, and queries and services. And these are the teams I'm part of. So immediately it's just like, okay, if I'm looking for a particular, I need to find a particular owner for a particular event, I can quickly find that and say, okay, well, these are the owners. They're the
Mm.
owners because they're in the same team. Um, and this is kind of just another view of the data, really, is just like, okay, I remember what I said at the start, it's I think there's a lot of time we can save with people trying to identify this stuff. Who owns this event? What is
Yeah.
the event? What does the schema look like? Why is it changed? Why does it have PII information there? What does an add inventory command mean to our organization? Oh,
Hmm.
okay, this is the kind of thing. It's on this particular channel. It's owned by these particular people. Oh, this is pretty cool, right? The
Hmm.
the alternative today, I'm not really sure what is the alternative, but from what I'm hearing from a lot of people, it's the alternative really is, as I mentioned, schema registries, right? But that doesn't give you hardly anything, any context.
Yeah.
Um,
It just gives you the payload, how it evolved, and more or less that's it.
Exactly, yeah. And there's, as you're aware, there's just huge value, I think, in
Yeah.
adding business context and context to things in our architecture that we can, and if we can quickly find these and visualize these, and we can do so much cool stuff. Um, Other
Yeah.
things we can, sorry, yeah.
I think that's great that you added that stuff like teams and people, because I also hear from folks that they would like to have the tool that would across the team would help to find those relationships,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like a inverse Conway maneuver. So
Mm,
you can help the teams to have a better discussions if they know when they should communicate with each other, or they can be even surprised that they are publishing the event and then they see they are thinking about, okay, we need to introduce new field or maybe change the schema in a bigger way, and
mhm,
they believe that yeah, no one is using them, but then they check on the docs and they see like, oh, three other teams are
mhm,
handling that, so we probably need to discuss with them how to introduce this change. So I think that
mhm,
such a inferior simple view and feature could
mhm.
be innate in many, especially bigger corporations where people are not so close to each other.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think once you have, the interesting thing is once you have this context and the information, this is kind of what I said earlier about this like governance first mindset in a way, because how do you keep this up to date? And I'll show you some automation ways in a second. Um, but like if you have a good foundation, like there are tools and things you can build on top, and Event Catalog can also build. It's like in this example, I'm about to make a schema change. Okay, so I can use the editor in the browser, for example. Say, okay, I want to add this field, and the context is aware enough to say you're about to break people. This is a breaking change. It's not backwards compatible change. You've removed a field, for example. Be aware you are going to break these people, these services. Oh, and by the way, these are the owners of these services. Yeah. So
Hmm.
it's like, okay, this is interesting now. So I think there's tons you can do. And another thing I added, this is I don't know if it's useful or not, but it could be useful. But I added yesterday actually, which is like RSS feeds. So you can actually see you actually like subscribe to RSS
Hmm.
feeds for everything in the event catalog. So your teams could say, okay, I want to know if any events are changing, whatever else, something you might be interested in. Um, so there's that. At a high level, high picture, this is Event Catalog. It supports custom components. You can write your own components. They could have JavaScript embedded in them. It doesn't matter. You can go as wild as you want. You document channels. Channels are documented like this, again, with front matter and markdown. It just has a different API. Supports all sorts of different protocols, Kafka, MQTT, NATS, anything really. You can support different address. You can use variables in the address, all sorts of things, as you see here, different parameters. When I go to a channel, see if I can go to one. Yeah, here we go. This is the channel that we just saw, and we can see the parameters are documented for us, right? And then we can
Hmm.
start documenting how we use this and this kind of stuff. So yeah, just another thing there. So the question I often get with any documentation tool is yeah, is like, how do you keep this up to date? And like, I don't want to do markdown. How do you automate a lot of this and this kind of stuff? And this is, yeah, good questions. So Event Catalog actually has integrations. has an SDK. So the SDK, let's see if we can find it. Um, SDK. Cool. So the SDK is it's a JavaScript library at the moment. It supports JavaScript because I'm a JavaScript dude. Um, so with an SDK, it becomes interesting because now we can integrate with anything. In theory, we can integrate with any kind of system and pull systems and pull schemas and do this kind of stuff. And the way to think about all of this is um, we have a schema registry. It's in Confluent as an example. We pull in schemas and we keep schemas up to date. So we have this branch is automated. We can also add semantic meaning to these schemas. So event catalog. So now this is a manual process. We can add documentation. We can keep the two in sync every time we pull the schemas, the semantic meaning will stay attached to these schemas. So that allows us to automate a lot of this stuff, but allows us to equally document a lot of this stuff. So keeping all of this in sync. So Event Catalog has like different integrations. So you can see here Open API, Async API, Event Bridge. There are a few here coming, like Azure Schema Registry isn't there. This was released this week, actually, Amazon API Gateway. There's GitHub and Backstage integrations and GitLab and Bitbucket as these integrations are working. And then some community plugins down here, which other people have built, which is really cool. So you can deploy on Kubernetes, HookDeck, and Atlassian. But the most popular ones, of course, are these ones, Open API and Async API. So how this works is probably, hopefully, as you imagine, it pulls down an async API file and we'll document these messages for you, right? And it will map these into event catalog. So to give an example, you can actually use this command here. I added yesterday. It seems like I added a lot yesterday. There's a theme there.
So,
Yeah. But I added these templates yesterday, so just to help people get up and running. So
mm,
this example was okay, I want to use an open API template. So if we go back to the terminal, let's just get out of this and let's use this. So we're going to call it my catalog. I'll call it open API. So this was just bootstrap us straight into this plugin, basically.
mhm,
So you can see here it's downloading the core and also downloading the generator. Now, Event Catalog, this is what we call them. We call them generators. These are essentially plugins. But as I mentioned, you can create custom plugins if you want, custom generators. You can do whatever you want. We have companies doing that. We also have companies just using these off-the-shelf ones. Um, for those who do not know what async API is, this is a specification that allows you, see if I can actually zoom in on that. Yeah, a spec that allows you to document message-based systems, so like event-driven systems. So I really recommend looking at that. But if you're using async API, you can do exactly the same with this command and get up and running. But let's go back to terminal. Hopefully we brought enough time. We didn't.
mhm.
um, so that's still
Yeah.
installed in there. Takes a minute. But yeah, I don't know if you've got any questions so far.
Uh, yeah, so definitely this SDK looks great as an idea. I definitely will play with that with Emmet, so my event-driven TypeScript tool. I see a lot of cases. For instance, I have this given when then tests
Mhm.
that can tell you that given this set of events, when I receive this command, then I
Mm.
got another event. So even
Mhm.
generating right from those tests, this can be quite useful to even automatically generate some flows between commands and events and also the other cases like that. So yeah, I really like it. Plus,
Yeah.
I know that in many environments like .NET, people
Mhm.
always prefer to do like code first. So if they have
Yeah.
this open API or other spec generated
Yeah.
automatically, then
Yeah.
that would be easier. I'm not saying which is better, but definitely
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
many people, it is really how they work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's important, especially around documentation tools. It's like integrating with these things, you know. it's a no-brainer. People, as you said, some people generate from code, some people generate spec first, but a lot of people have open API specs
Hmm.
and async API specs, and like, why can't we use these specs to generate some more things, which we can. And let's have a look at an example of that. So to show you an example of this, the async API works exactly the same, but we have a folder, right? This is an event catalog folder, but this time a few things are different. We have this concept of generators. Now, what generators are the plugins, just called generators. And so what we can do is we can like set it up. So we set it up here and we say, okay, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to take this open API spec from here. So this could be
Hmm.
from anywhere. Um, and I'm going to map it into this service. Oh, and I'm going to assign these owners to it. Okay, so, and by the way, we're also going to assign this service to this particular domain. This is optional. You don't have to do that. But what we're doing is we're saying, I'm taking a bunch of open API specs and mapping them into the service. The same down here, we map into the order service, and the same down here, we map into, sorry, a payment domain and orders domain there. And then equally, you can also do this. You can actually have the path as a URL. So if you've got a URL you prefer to get it from URL, you don't have to have them
Hmm.
in your event catalog. And then what we do is we run the generate command. So if we go to the async API files, there is a couple of things worth shouting out here, really. Most of this stuff you might be familiar with, but event catalog also has a couple of extensions that you might want to use. But in this example, what we're saying here is that when we map this get on the root, I guess here, or we have the operation ID get cart, we're going to map it to a query. So OpenAPI and Async API have no concept of queries, commands, and events.
Hmm.
They're just messages. But if you want, so by default, if I don't do this, everything is a query
Uh-huh.
in OpenAPI world. Um, but if you want to, like a post request could be a command. I'm asking you, I'm telling you to add an item to a cart. This could be rejected. This is a type of command. I'm retrieving some information. This could be a query. So there are other extensions you can use. You might want to look at the docs, but that's just worth shouting out. And then down here, all we've got here is we've got the teams and we've got the users. Now, what we don't have here, we don't have the domains, we don't have the services, we don't have messages or any of that kind of stuff. So what we can do is now we can run this generate command. What we need to do for that is we actually need to get a license key. I don't mind sharing this because these are just trial licenses anyway that will expire. But if you go to eventcatalog.cloud, you can see the integrations here, and then we're just looking for the Open API one. We click on the install, and then we can copy this license key. So I copy the license key, and now what I'm going to do is put this inside this terminal. Um, so export license key, the Open API one. So the reason people might be wondering why do we need license keys for some of this stuff is because Event Catalog is like an open source, so it's full-time open source project, and the plugins and the things that we maintain require a license for that. So you can use these things for 14 days for free, this automation stuff, and then you have to purchase a license to use that, just to help sustain the open source project. Otherwise, I have to stop and get a job. in in at the end of the year probably.
Yeah.
So now if I've done that, now I can run the generate command. So what's going to happen here is going to generate our messages from our open API spec file. So as you can see here, we're processing the domain, we create the domain, we're processing a message, and it continues to go on. We run the dev command as usual, and then we go back here and we go back to localhost. Let's see what happens. And now we can see this whole event catalog here is actually documented using our async API files. So we can see the services, we've got our commands, we've got our events, we've got the visualizer, we've got our this user directory where we can see people because we've assigned teams to these things already. So everything here is like automated. So if we make a change, these changes will get represented in event catalog. But as I said earlier, you want to also have the ability to add semantic meaning. So let's try that. Let's this is by the demo gods. See what they think. Everything's going well so far. So initiate payment, we got a command somewhere. So let's have a look. So we have the domains, we have the payment, services, commands, initiate payment. So as you'll notice too, this is a change made last week or week before, but everything's like nested inside of this folder structure for you. So here we have this thing and we have this stuff that's generated. Now, when you run your generator, the front matter parts, most of the front matter will be overridden. Things that won't be overridden every time you run it are things like owners, but other things will. But what this allows us to do is things like this. Let's uh, let's see if we can do this. Yeah, create more detailed description, see if it works. Come on. Hello. Description. There we go. Nice. Great. That'll do. So we go back to the thing. We got this context to this particular command now. But when things change, let's go back and see if we can get this working. I have to remember where the command was. What command was this? Initiate payment. Payment API. This is the one. So I've got the payment request. Let's take the amount off, see what happens. Remove that. So we've make a change to the schema. Anyway, things happen, and then we run the generate command again. So what generate will do now is it will, do things that we just saw before, match things, and but this time, hopefully, this works. Is the schema has changed and everything else, and things are kept automated. But as you see here, that the information has been persisted, right? The context has been persisted, and you'll see here that the request body that value that we just had has now been
Hmm.
removed. So we can keep things up to date, and equally, if we were to version the specification or the message, which you can do through generator through extensions. Event Catalog will automatically version this stuff for you too. So you can, start seeing some of this stuff. And then equally, what I want to do is automatically do change logs and diffs. So to give you an example, if you had today we had our spec file, tomorrow we have another spec file. Event Catalog should be able to automatically diff this, automatically version this for us.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like a brief overview of how these files work. So you, as I said earlier, you can integrate this. We can find it with various different things. Event Bridge, API Gateway as an example. All you got to do is point it at your API gateway, and something similar will happen. You would just get these things documented for you. The other kind of core feature missing to the whole thing, well, that I haven't spoke about yet, cautious of time is the integrations, like how do you scale event catalog with 20 teams, 50 teams, 100 teams, and like thousands of engineers. And this is the problem with most documentation tools, is like it becomes really hard to keep these things up to date. So what's the option? And the option that we support at the moment is something called federation. So how federation works, I'll just give you like a quick overview. It's like we have team one, right? And we have a different team, and we have a different team, like, you know, team two and team three. And so what we're trying to get to is an event catalog that can document our systems for us. Now, option one is we have one event catalog, and as we scale teams, this becomes harder and harder and harder. Maybe, or maybe not for you. But if it does, there is options and things to do. Um, so the other option is why couldn't each team have its own event catalog? Okay. So this has this, this has this, this has this. And then what happens here is we have a main catalog. So this is your central catalog. And these are your team's catalogs. Now, what we can do here is we can use called Event Catalog Federation, which will these all feed into. Okay. So this works with any Git provider, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, it doesn't really matter. Um, and this is kind of the flow. So what this allows people to do is it allows to keep their event catalog, right, next to their code in their code base. And allows them to have a local version. So what this and one thing I'm got feedback from this week and I'm looking at too is allowing teams to actually document private events, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and yeah, so there are events in this team that no one cares about but this team. So why would these events belong in this catalog so we can actually start to do some of this stuff? So that's something I'm looking at. But the whole idea here really is like if you have 3 teams, 10 teams, um, we can start using Federation to pull these in. Now, how this works is it uses a generator and it pulls these in, and you can actually pick which things you want. So I'll show you a quick example of how this one works. Oh, excuse me. And then let's have a quick look. So all the examples, by the way, that I'm showing are I added these last week. So if you go
Mm-hmm.
to generators from Event Catalog, these are our generators that we have. But if you go to examples, you can see examples for each one. So I'll give you an example for the Open API that we just looked at. You can see a basic example, which I showed you. You can see fetching from remote URLs. You can see independent messaging version. Now, why would you want that? It's because if you don't want your messages to version at the same rate your spec is versioning, maybe you can do things. And you can also map queries and commands. So you can go into each one of these, you can clone these, check these out, and have a play. But the federation is here. I should have just used that. The federation, it looks exactly like that. It's each team has their own catalog. Federation pulls from that and puts it into a central catalog. What that looks like is we have 3 catalogs here and we have a central catalog. So the payment team have their own catalog. Now, everything you see here is exactly what we were speaking about this session. We have services and teams and users and various things. One thing that we've not really spoke about is this idea of dependencies. So if you're in like child catalog, I guess you can call it a subcatalog, and you have external dependencies. What I mean by this is you're consuming an event from another team, but you don't want to document this event, right? You're consuming it and it's up to them to document that and manage the schemas in that. This dependencies allows you to just mock that out in event catalog and just say, like, we'll do our thing, but just to let event catalog know that we have these things that we depend on. So event catalog can render the visuals for you and everything else. So we have 3 teams, they're doing their thing, and then we have one central catalog. The central catalog has not a lot in it. The central catalog has this thing here. So it uses federation generator, similar to what we just did. So in this case, we have a source. So this source is this repo itself, but this
Mm-hmm.
could be your repo, it could be your Bitbucket, GitLab repo, whatever else. You can specify a branch, and then if you want to, you can specify exactly which things you want to copy. Or if you don't, Event Catalog will make the attempt to copy all the resources in. So in this case, what we're saying is we're copying the services in, we're copying the teams in, and we're copying the users in, and that's it. We're going to override if we find any merge conflicts because it's going to be like last right wins. That's how it works. And then we're also telling this generator to enforce unique resources, meaning If we have 10 teams and we have duplicate IDs and resources, that the generator would stop and tell you. And that's it. And then we do the same for the payment team and we do the same for the other team. This way, when we run this, it actually goes in and generates a catalog full of information from these teams. And just to show you this in action, what I would do is I'll go to the integrations. So we need a generator, we need a federation key, which I'll just take here. We'll go back to the central catalog, which we just seen on GitHub. I'm going to export the federation key, and then with a bit of luck, we run generate. So what it's doing is it's just moving things around. As it moves things around, it puts them into the right places, and then we can run dev. So now imagine your CI/CD pipeline. What people are doing is they're running their catalog builds every hour. They're running on CI/CD. Doesn't matter. You can run it on webhooks. You can do whatever it is you want. To build this, all you need to do is run npm run build. And then what we can see here is the central catalog. So this is pulling information from free projects. This could be 10 or 20 or 50 or 100. And then we can see everything in here. We can actually see the events. We can see the services. As we said earlier, we can see the teams. So these teams are now coming from all these catalogs. These catalogs are now referencing the information. So, this is the question is how can you scale this? How can you scale event catalog? And I think Federation is one way you can do that. And as I said, what this allows teams to do is just keep docs locally, keep docs next to the code if they want, and use open. You can even use Open API or Async API specifications to generate your own docs, and then
Mm-hmm.
these own docs can merge into into the main kind of docs. So different patterns, different kind of topologies here. And as I said, there were a couple of things coming out. I know, cautious of time. A couple of other things that are coming out are things like having runtime information. So the interesting thing is, EventCatalog uses something called Astro under the hood,
Mm-hmm.
and excuse me, it's a lot of talking, a lot of gas. Um, Astro under the hood. So Astro actually has this really cool idea of like server islands. What this means for anyone that's interested in is it allows us to actually integrate like runtime uh, sections or components into the static content. So what I see with Event Catalog, for example, is if you had a schema registry, you don't want to keep your schemas in Event Catalog. You can still import them, but we just call your schema registry at runtime and always get the up-to-date one. So if your teams are changing schemas on a regular basis, we can actually get this information. We can actually get open telemetry information and display this. We can debug information, all sorts of things. So there's that thing, and then there's this other thing that I'm working on, which is this, which I spoke about earlier, which is something I'm personally excited by, but it's like it's kind of inspiration from event storming in ways. But like, why, if we have an inventory of your system, why can't we create designs from this system? Like
Mm-hmm.
Oscar, if we were to create a new feature today, we can actually drag and drop these things into this ecosystem. We can collaborate, we can comment, we can use our AI to generate schemas for us or whatever else. But as I'm doing this is actually mapping to event catalog on my file system. So I don't have to edit markdown files or anything else. I can just use this WYSIWYG thing here. So yeah, lots of things going on. But if you're with that, with all of that, I can probably talk a lot and have already. But if you're interested, yeah, come check out the project. Give it a star. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's open source. You can come check it out. You can hang out. We're almost at 1,000. Look at that. Almost.
Mm,
Um,
nice.
so if you want to come check out on Discord if you've got any questions. It's like there are people on there, a community on there, and contributors on there just wanting to help out, which is really cool. So yeah, I hope that was a deep dive enough for the audience. But yeah, I don't know if you got any questions or if you want me to
Mm.
go over anything else.
Yeah, I think that it was a great introduction. You managed to show a lot of stuff in that hour. Um, Regarding the questions, Is it planned or maybe it's already there? Maybe some nesting of domains like domain,
Mm,
subdomain, and maybe grouping, for instance, commands or events within them. Because in
mm,
the source code, I already see that you provide this grouping by the domain, also for
mm,
commands, services, etc. But
mm,
are you already thinking about adding some potential nesting or yeah,
mm.
what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, at the moment, no, but there's no reason why it couldn't be. Um, yeah, there's no reason why it couldn't be. Like, if this is a thing people want, feel free to
Mm-hmm,
raise an issue, get involved. Yeah,
mm-hmm,
I like as you said, domain already has these resources nested, so why can't a domain have other domains nested,
mm,
right? In theory, and have subdomains and things like that. So yeah, it's a possibility for sure.
yeah,
It's just at
yeah,
the moment, it's kind of just stopped at the holistic view of like grouping things up.
mm-hmm,
But if people will like, especially from like a DDD background, want more and more um, flexibility around that, yeah,
mm-hmm,
right. Raise
yeah.
some issues and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let us know for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, or maybe something like C people doing C4 model,
Yeah,
because it also has this notion of nesting and zooming in, zooming out. I think it could be
yeah,
useful for the federation to limit because
yeah,
potentially you can get like hundreds of events or messages.
yeah, yeah. One
Um,
thing we have at the moment is we actually have a pull request open now, which I'm going to review. We have like a different view on the document on the sidebar. You've seen it. We've got a list of events, queries, commands, and
mhm,
stuff. One of the contributors has actually added like a tree view, which allows you to group things up and
mm,
actually expand them like
yeah.
folders and stuff, so you can actually see that. But I really like the idea of what you're saying, and other people have said the same. Is like on the homepage, I want to change the homepage to be a different entry point for people depending on what they want to do and the personas they are. So like as you said, like I want to have things like domains, like as you mentioned, an experience where I can click into a domain and then I can see the services. I can click into services and I can see
Hmm.
the events, right? So at the moment, everything is like very flat in ways.
Hmm.
But I think it's just a visual
Yeah,
representation
yeah.
and things like that. But yeah,
Yeah, technically, currently someone could cheat it with the like you dots or whatever like domain like orders dots fulfillment etc. So yeah, I
yeah,
mean it's not a I mean definitely showstopper. Just was curious about it,
yeah, yeah,
but yeah, I really like it's clearly visible that you put a lot of thoughts behind it and experience because it's covering many cases like governance, viewing, visualizations, especially those integrations later on. That's uh, that's great that it's already possible, and those thieves probably in the future it could be like comparing your documented way with the real world.
yeah,
How
exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. That's a key feature actually. Other people are speaking about recently is how do you know what the schema is being published is a schema we have documented,
Yeah.
right? And then how do you notify people of that? And I think Event Catalog at the moment it still feels like we're building the foundations of all of
Hmm.
this, and
Yeah,
I think there are huge opportunities there, and
exactly.
to do stuff like that. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, and equally, I think there are also I don't like the AI hype and most of that, but even I think there is value here, and what I mean by that is. Um, why can't we ask our catalog questions like what events do we have?
Hmm.
Or like I'm about to build a new feature that gets triggered when a user signs up, when they sign up on a trial. Okay, well you can use this event we already have. We have 1,000 events. This
Hmm.
team's already doing it. Oh, great, awesome. Let me dive deeper. Because
Hmm.
like today, as I said earlier, it's like where do you start? I don't know. You just duplicate the effort, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think there is just huge value in this ecosystem, and the biggest challenge I think is just the governance mindset and
Hmm.
documentation mindset and schema first mindset. And but I think APIs have always had this
Mm,
challenge too with open API spec. And
yeah,
as I said right at the start, it's just history repeating. So just take the lessons we learned from that and apply it to some of these tools,
yeah, yeah.
ecosystems.
I think that it's kind of like a feedback loop and a vicious circle that people are not documenting stuff and they have excuse that, well, but we don't have this tool, even there are no tools. So I
Mm,
even if I document, then someone needs to go to GitHub, or how do I show it to the business people so they
mm,
could also see that or contribute. And without
yeah,
having those tools, then that's a really easy excuse. And I think that Event Catalog definitely has this potential to at least cut this vicious circle, if not fully, then maybe
mm,
in a good enough way. So
yeah,
yeah, I really, really enjoyed the presentation, and definitely I will need to play more with it because
yeah, for
I
sure.
already see a big value.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, yeah, I appreciate inviting me on and things like that. As I said, you got your open source projects, Emmet, and the stuff you're doing. So yeah, I'd be curious, as you said earlier, about the BDD stuff and the given when
Hmm.
thens, and curious to learn that. Curious to learn more and like how could it help or this kind of stuff. So huge opportunities for this toolings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for if you're still with us and watch this webinar fully, then please drop us a comment or ask on Discord, either on the Event Catalog Discord or on Architecture Weekly Discord. Let's have the discussion. And if we were talking with David that maybe we could do some other webinar, like going through some simple but real project, let's say, like
Mhm.
from taking some sample and trying to document it. So if you're interested, ping us and we'll consider that, and maybe we can make that happen. So yeah, thanks, David. That was a really, really nice introduction. At least for me, I had a huge fun with that, and I'm sure that people will also enjoy.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot. As I said, Oscar, appreciate the invite. Good to speak to you again. So I'm glad you found it useful.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So thank you, David. Till the next time.
Yeah.
And yeah, see ya.
See you guys.